What is the single worst Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time? We've got plenty of ideas as players as to what the best cards are, from Pot of Greed or Painful Choice in the main deck, to most importantly the extra, with cards like Electromite, Shockmaster, or True King of all calamities. Yu-Gi-Oh is littered with broken. It is a game that prides itself on limit testing the boundaries of what is or isn't reasonable in card games. From summoning infinite attack Apollousas to forcing your opponent to activate cards against their will. The things you see in Yu-Gi-Oh can seem like a TCG living nightmare. And yet, on the opposite end of that spectrum, Yu-Gi-Oh has some of the most laughably bad monsters. We don't mean lackluster or underwhelming, but straight up detrimental, psychologically, to everyone involved. Today, we are going to do a deep dive on some of the most impossible, idiotic, and downright useless cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Your immediate thought as to what a bad Yu-Gi-Oh card is most likely takes you towards the plethora of normal monsters that exist in the game with completely unplayable stat lines. There are monsters that have no real purpose outside of simply existing, kinda like some people. If you've ever played an old Yu-Gi-Oh video game, then you've definitely come across Forbidden Memories, a game which predates the physical release of the Yu-Gi-Oh card game in the West, utilizing a bunch of stupid and weird clunky mechanics like star signs, and yet most notably of all, has hundreds of bad normal monsters, like Uguchi. And yet, for whatever reason, a lot of these cards do not exist in the TCG. Most important of all, Bat. Why has Bat never been released in the TCG? Because Japanese players get better hands on Master Duel or something. It's lagging! It's fucking lagging! What is it? It looks bugged! What is going on? You see, despite the fact these cards have pitifully low attack points, then you might arrive at the conclusion that the absolute worst Yu-Gi-Oh cards would be Thousand Eye Idol and So Itsu. 0 attack and defense, and putting your opponent on quite literally an infinite clock. But yet, the most worthless Yu-Gi-Oh monsters can, at an absolute minimum, be given some kind of value by just boosting its attack and making it big. Having a monster, no matter how small, can always be manipulated with in some ways to give it value, and by that point, would be able to take down life points. But here's the problem for those of you that have been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for long enough at this point, you will have noticed that there is so many normal monster support cards in the game. These can be tutored out of the deck with cards like Unexpected Die, or brought back from the graveyard in their droves with Swing of Memories, or Try White. If you've seen any of my Table 500 series, you'll be aware of a card like Treasure Panda, a monster with the effect to banish a spell from your graveyard, and then special a monster from your deck with a level equal to the number of spells banished, which is not once per turn, resulting in theory, infinite materials to perform summons using the extra deck. By using a lot of worthless monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh, they can be repurposed for better monsters from the extra deck. So as bad as these plays might be, one would really have to question whether a normal monster can ever truly be a bad card. And your next train of thought might be, well, these are low-level monsters. Naturally, they're going to be easier to summon just with a normal. They can be sent off the field into the graveyard to draw with cards like White Elephant's Gift, and of course all of the other spell cards that tutor like I just mentioned. Well, we could take a look at some of the higher level monsters in the game. And the reason for why we would look at higher level monsters is because you are now introducing the tribute mechanic, meaning that it is significantly harder to put these onto the board. Now, although there are plenty of ways to special normal monsters onto the field, the ease of access in doing that does begin to trend downwards once you incorporate tributes as a requirement, secondary cards, or simply by virtue of just being a higher level. Infamously, Shape Snatch has been seen as one of the worst Yu-Gi-Oh cards ever. This card is level 5, which means it cannot be normal summoned out of the gate for free as a level 4 or lower typically could, and on top of that has lower stats than hundreds of level 4 monsters that don't require tributes. And if you so specifically need a Dark Machine, Mechanical Chaser fulfills that purpose with one less tribute. In the same way that Shape Snatch became a meme in the West because of its egregiously low stats thanks to Rata, the same banter came about in Japan with Morinfen, a similarly weak monster to Shape Snatch, although it does sit at a mighty 1550 compared to it. Early Yu-Gi-Oh, pre-card game Yu-Gi-Oh mostly, was plagued with hundreds of vanillas with all kinds of just horrendously low stats. If you want to elaborate further on the shape snatch theory, you could just incorporate one more tribute. Being level 7 or higher now means that in order to summon this monster onto the field, you have to sacrifice 2 monsters. And of course, as mentioned, just being higher level tends to make it more difficult to put these guys onto the board. The worst statted level 7 or higher monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arrive at 4,300 combined stats, and that is Slot Machine and Stone Dragon, 2 monsters that have 2,000 attack points each. Monsters that are so pitifully low that a level 4 normal summonable Megalo Smasher X or a Gene Warp Werewolf can crash with them. So why would you ever play them? To summarize, let's look at it from the perspective of raw card game economy. A monster represents a piece on your board that creates tempo and value simply by existing. Even if it requires 2 tributes, it is still something that can be utilized as a weapon, boosted from even 0 attack with equip spells, and in the scope of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Can even be given significant value with a more newer archetype called a Primite. Primite is a recent addition to the game that fully centers around various normal monsters which can banish and negate your opponent's monsters by revealing one of these bad normals in your hand. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players even took this a step further by running cards like White Dust On, a light fiend that meant that you could link summon into Requiem and go for an entire Fiendsmith line. Things like this and examples as such pop up so often that the reality is there can never really truly be a bad Yu-Gi-Oh! Monster card. As terrible as all of the cards mentioned are, by virtue of just being a monster that can be placed on the field, this makes them significantly better and more powerful, usually than spells and traps, even bad ones. As the modern game develops further and further with constant wombo combos and bridges between engines, the most random cards have seen play decades later. Exiled Force, probably power crept in like 2006, showed up again in 2015 during Necro's format. Curse of Anubis, a very hyper-specific high-level monster, was then cited against Tearlament more recently as a target for Mannequin Cat in Sprite. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is littered with bad monsters or super niche hyper-specific instances of cards that can later be incorporated into a side deck depending on very specific interactions and matchups. We can even talk about attribute and typing requirements being important. Over 10 years ago, when Monarchs were a meta deck with the release of the Empire of Darkness structure deck, the level 5 vanilla monster Dark Witch was played for no reason other than being a level 5 fairy that facilitated the summoning requirements of the massively powerful Brilliant Fusion engine at the time for the card Seraphinite. Lazuli could recycle the Dark Witch back to the hand and then be summoned onto the field in order to tribute over Return of the Monarchs and get you into your engine plays like Erebus and Aether. So from here, really, if you introduce some effect text, perhaps these cards get worse. Because your natural reaction is, well, if you just put text on a normal monster, it can only be a net positive, right? But the problem is there are so many Yu-Gi-Oh cards with negative effects, and not just a positive effect with a drawback. No, this is actual detrimental effects to yourself for no benefit. Take a look at, for example, Dark Artist. Not only does this card have a measly 600 attack points, but it also has the effect of having its defense reduced by half if attacked by a light monster. It has 1400 defense. A wet fart after tacos is probably enough to take this guy out. Half of 1400 is 700. That's basically nothing. So the criteria here really needs to be as follows. The card has to have basically no application whatsoever in 99.9% of circumstances. It also needs to not be a monster card, because for everything I've just mentioned, monsters at an absolute minimum can be boosted and manipulated with in some shape or form in order to actually just attack your opponent. And number 3, it cannot have any synergies whatsoever with any other card in the game, in theory. But before moving on to some spells and traps, I want to talk about someone very iconic, and that is the Swordsman of a Distant Land. This is truly iconic because it is typically seen by Yu-Gi-Oh players as perhaps the weakest monster card in the game. It is a 250 attack monster and is a level 1 Earth Warrior, which states if this card attacked an opponent's monster, after damage calculation, destroy that monster during the 5th end phase after the attack. the end phase of the 5th turn later. Assuming your 250 attack monster didn't just instantly die. At that point, I would have to pass my turn, which then goes to your turn 2. In which case, you can just link off your monster, fuse it, synchro with it, do anything with it to avoid the 5th turn implosion. But let's pretend in some alternative reality you have suffered a mild instance of insanity and have decided to just instantly pass back for no reason, perhaps out of pity. Well, it'll be now my turn 3, in which I guess I'm playing Swordsman of a Distant Land in my deck, so I'm not going to be doing much either. I would then have to pass that turn back to you, and for the second time, you would have to not use that monster as material, as synchro fodder, fusion fodder, or do anything meaningful to me as a player, and then pass back again to me, who I would then be able to, on the end of that 5th turn, remember, don't just trigger it immediately, I would go to the battle phase, your guy would still be there, and I would go to the end of the turn, and that's when, finally, your monster would be defeated. By the time Swordsman of a Distant Land has dealt with a real threat in Yu-Gi-Oh, it will have been enough time to probably finish an entire manga chapter, do something else on your other monitor, or probably learn an entirely different language. And the card Zone Eater acts exactly in the same way. It is truly a tidal wave crashing over, like, a puddle. Now, in the context of discussing the worst ever cards in the game, some names do usually creep up. For example, Pot of Generosity. This card simply reads, shuffle 2 cards from your hand into the deck. The cost of playing the card is -1, as it goes to the graveyard, and then plus the 2 that you shuffle away, means that you are now down to 2 cards on resolution of Pot of Generosity, deleting your entire hand. We're not even discarding it to the graveyard. We're not getting powerful grave effects like Dark Worlds, as you would with, for example, potentially the Cheerful Coffin. Nope, you are just putting the cards into the deck, triggering nothing, and going straight up -3. So there is a very strong argument for this to take the trophy as the single worst Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time. However, there may be in fact real-world applications for Pot of Generosity. You see, you've heard of Slop, and we aren't talking about the Krabby Patty. So many broken one-card combo engines in Yu-Gi-Oh require you to keep very specific combo pieces inside of the main deck. If you draw Gem Knight Garnet, you couldn't resolve Brilliant Fusion. If you draw Mitsurugi Mirror, you cannot resolve Preparation of Rites. Dragoonity Divine Wind, Medius, all of these cards need specific cards inside of the deck and cannot function with them being in the hand. Now, while Power Creep has addressed most engines and cards like this by simply adding the clause you can special from the deck or hand, a few of these are still littered around until today. And that is where Pot of Generosity's real-world application comes in. Activating it to put back all of these pesky bricks like O-Lion or Phalanx in order to fully resolve your combo for the minuscule cost of -3 and having drawn the correct starter versus no interrupts, because my opponent better not have an Ash Blossom, otherwise I will kill my... Now, while this is technically a correct and logical real-world application and example of Pot of Generosity, in a TCG you would never deck build like this. The idea behind putting a really terrible card in your deck list to facilitate a unlucky situation is very fallacious and counterproductive from deck building. In an instance where you do draw that Garnet or whatever, you kind of just have to accept that you will just take the L there. You could play more total number of cards in your main deck in order to dilute the chances of drawing these one-offs, but straight up playing Pot of Generosity is definitely not worth it. So that brings us to what I think could probably be classified as the single worst Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time. As we've established all of the criteria already, it cannot be a monster, have any real synergies with any other interaction, and be super hyper-specific and niche to be essentially useless. No matter how heavy the cost, the summoning condition, the low stats, monsters can always be manipulated in some way. And so while you might be thinking, well, clearly the best answer to this question of worst Yu-Gi-Oh card of all time should be a trap card, right? And yet somehow, some way, after research into this for a long time, the Yu-Gi-Oh community hasn't really truly found a trap card as bad as this quick play spell. And that is the card Cold Feet. You cannot activate, set, or use the effects of any spell traps this turn. You, as in the player, the one activating it. You are deliberately placing a condition on yourself to not be able to do something. Now you see, Cold Wave is an old school DM staple that is completely broken and simply reads neither player can do this, which as you can imagine is ludicrous in the modern age, and this card is indeed a reference to Cold Wave, shutting down all the back row, but that's about as far as we can go in their comparison. Cold Feet is a -1 in card advantage that gives absolutely no benefit whatsoever. No specific and clutch rare usage like Pot of Generosity, this card will only be a negative addition to your deck. Discarding it for Karma Cut would be more useful than actually using it. But there is indeed one very specific interaction that makes this card playable. And because of this, there is unfortunately no real Yu-Gi-Oh card that cannot under all and any circumstances in the game, through any combo you create, be truly useless. Because as bad as they are, you will be able to find niche positions and interactions to make them work. If you activate Cold Feet as Chainlink 1, you can chain the trap card Mystical Ref panel as Chainlink 2. This card states activate only when a spell card that targets one player is activated. The effect of that spell card is applied to the other player instead. Now, your opponent cannot activate or set spells and traps, and you are therefore free to pop off and do some combos and win that turn. Yay! We found the one very hyper-specific niche instance where Cold Feet actually has a play. One thing I've learned from this little rabbit hole I've went down is that, yeah, there is truly no such thing as a useless Yu-Gi-Oh card. But if you think otherwise and you believe that there is one other card out there that cannot under any circumstances have any useful choices or activation requirements or combos, then let me know in the let me know in the description down below. I'd like to honorably mention cards such as Localized Tornado, a card which shuffles your entire hand and grave away into the deck, and Unfortunate Report, that gives your opponent 2 battle phases. I found that these cards have more use cases than Cold Feet does. No matter how niche and specific, there are other wacky things you could do. You could loop your opponent's hand with them instead, using the same combo described with the Tornado. You can make your opponent attack into a big guy multiple times with the Unfortunate Report. You can set up a combo and skip their main phase with the Bamboo Sword combo that happens all the time in table 500. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this type of video, make sure you subscribe. Consider becoming a YouTube channel member, Patreon, Twitch subscriber as well, where I stream almost daily on twitch.tv/Farfa. And hopefully we'll see you in the next random over-explained video essay about a really dumb niche subject. Bye-bye, and see you then.